When Jimmy Kimmel walked back onto his stage after nearly a week in limbo, it wasn't just another night of jokes, sketches, and celebrity interviews. The set looked the same, the band played as they always did, and the crowd rose in a standing ovation that seemed to stretch longer than usual. But the air in the studio carried something heavier, something fragile. This wasn't the triumphant return of a comic who'd been on vacation. This was a man who'd been silenced, publicly humiliated, and suspended in the middle of a national storm, walking back into the spotlight with the eyes of the country on him. Everyone wanted to know whether Jimmy Kimmel, one of America's most visible late-night hosts, would play it safe, issue an apology, or let his emotions take over. What they got instead was a raw, tearful monologue that reminded everyone why late-night television, even in the age of streaming and social media, still has the power to stop people in their tracks. The trouble began with a single comment. On September 17th, Kimmel had addressed the shocking murder of Charlie Kirk, the co-founder of Turning Point USA, who was gunned down during an event in Utah.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
In trying to condemn the ugly politicization of Kirk's death, Kimmel ended up sparking outrage himself. He remarked that the MAGA gang was desperately trying to characterize the suspected killer as anything other than one of their own, accusing them of twisting tragedy for political points. It was a moment of frustration, the kind of off-the-cuff jab that Kimmel has made 1,000 times before. But this time, the backlash was immediate and brutal. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr blasted him publicly. Disney and ABC yanked Jimmy Kimmel live off the air to avoid inflaming a tense situation, and conservative media painted him as a heartless Hollywood elitist mocking a grieving widow. For days, the story dominated headlines. Was Kimmel finished? Would ABC cut him loose permanently? Would the government itself, through Carr's not-so-veiled threats, find a way to shut him down for good? When he returned on September 23rd, Kimmel seemed less like a comedian warming up an audience than a man carrying the weight of an entire week's worth of accusations, fears, and second-guessing. He opened with a joke about who'd had the stranger weekend, him or the CEO of Tylenol, but the levity didn't stick. His eyes were already misting over as he pivoted into what he really wanted to say, and the laughter turned into silence as viewers realized they were about to witness something unscripted and deeply personal. Kimmel began talking about Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, who just 2 days earlier had stunned the country with her eulogy. Standing at a memorial service in Arizona, her husband's coffin draped and her voice breaking, Erica announced that she forgave the man who had murdered Charlie. Tyler Robinson, the accused shooter, had stolen her partner, her children's father, her best friend. And still she said, "I forgive him because it was what Christ did and it is what Charlie would do." The answer to hate is not hate. The answer is love, and always love.
I forgive him.
Kimmel couldn't get through that part without choking up. There was a moment over the weekend, a very beautiful moment. He told his audience, his voice cracking. On Sunday, Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow. The crowd applauded, but Kimmel put his hand over his face, trying to push back tears. "If you believe in the teachings of Jesus, as I do, there it was," he added, pausing to collect himself. A selfless act of grace, forgiveness from a grieving widow. It touched me deeply, and I hope it touches many. For a man who has built a career on sarcasm and satire, the vulnerability was startling. He wasn't making a joke, he wasn't hedging, he was breaking in front of millions of viewers, overwhelmed not by the controversy that had nearly cost him his job, but by the sight of a woman who, in the depths of grief, chose compassion over vengeance. The irony was impossible to miss. Kimmel had been suspended for supposedly disrespecting the Kirks, yet here he was openly revering Erica's strength, crying as he admitted how much her act of forgiveness had humbled him. It was an extraordinary reversal of the narrative. For days, critics had painted him as a cold partisan hack, yet his return showed something else entirely. A man struggling with guilt, empathy, and the desire to get it right. He reminded viewers that he had posted a message of sympathy on Instagram the day Charlie was killed.
I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do.
sending love to the Kirk family and condemning gun violence. "It was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man," he insisted, his voice steadying. "I don't think there's anything funny about it. I meant it then, and I still do." He explained that his words about the MAGA gang weren't meant to blame a group, but to criticize the political exploitation of tragedy. "If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way," he admitted, conceding that his timing may have been poor and his meaning unclear.
Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both.
"I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't, ever." The suspension itself had been messy, and Kimmel didn't shy away from addressing it. He pointed out that Brendan Carr, the FCC chair, had publicly pressured Disney and ABC to act against him, warning stations that if they continued airing Kimmel's show, they could face regulatory headaches. "That is a government threat to silence a comedian," Kimmel said, his anger briefly piercing through the sadness. "That is anti-American." To him, it wasn't just about his own job, but about the principle of free speech, about whether comedians would be allowed to criticize the powerful without fear of government retaliation. "This show isn't important," he said. "What's important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this."
This show is not important. What is important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this.
The studio audience erupted in cheers, but Kimmel wasn't playing the hero. He knew the risks. Sinclair and Nexstar, two of the biggest station groups in the country, were still refusing to carry his program. Some of his own family couldn't even watch his return. Disney, meanwhile, was caught between defending its star and trying to avoid a political war with the White House. It was a surreal position for a late-night comedian to be in, suspended not for ratings, not for scandal, but because the federal government had leaned on his network. And then there was Trump. Almost as soon as Kimmel's monologue wrapped, and before it even aired on the East Coast, the former president took to Truth Social to gloat and rage. "I can't believe ABC fake news gave Jimmy Kimmel his job back," Trump wrote, claiming he'd been told Kimmel was canceled for good. He mocked Kimmel's ratings, trashed his talent, and suggested that ABC was essentially providing the Democratic Party with illegal campaign contributions by keeping him on the air. He even hinted at legal action. For Trump, it was a chance to score points against one of his most consistent critics. For Kimmel, it was proof that the fight wasn't over. Every word he said on that stage could and would be weaponized, not just by pundits, but by the most powerful political figures in the country. Yet the moment that lingered wasn't Trump's post or Carr's threats. It was Erica Kirk's forgiveness, refracted through Kimmel's tears. That image, a late-night host, usually smirking behind a desk, suddenly fighting to hold himself together as he praised the grace of a widow, carried a weight that outlasted the headlines. It blurred the lines between comedy and tragedy, entertainment and morality, politics and faith. For viewers, it was a reminder that even in the middle of the ugliest culture wars, humanity can cut through. And for Kimmel, it was a chance to show that beneath the jokes and the monologues was a person who could still be shaken by the simplest, hardest truth, that forgiveness is stronger than hate. In the days that followed, debate raged on. Was Kimmel's suspension proof of government overreach? Was his tearful return a sincere reflection or a savvy bid for redemption? Would ABC continue to back him despite pressure, or would they eventually fold? But in living rooms across America, what many remembered wasn't the political fallout, but the image of a man wiping tears from his eyes, admitting he'd been deeply touched by someone else's courage. The controversy had begun with accusations that he had disrespected a widow. It ended, at least for that night, with him honoring her more openly and emotionally than anyone expected. And maybe that's why people couldn't look away. It wasn't just a monologue. It was a collision of politics, grief, forgiveness, censorship, and the fragility of live television, all playing out in real time. It was the kind of moment that can't be manufactured, the kind of crack in the usual late-night routine that makes audiences sit forward instead of scrolling on their phones. Jimmy Kimmel broke down on camera, and in doing so, he reminded the country that even in the loudest storms, even in the middle of a suspension, even with a president threatening lawsuits, what still matters most are the quiet acts of grace that can bring a man to tears.